Hey guys, welcome back. This is the second segment of our NintendoFuse Industry Talk. I'm your host, Barry, from NintendoFuse. We're joined today again by Steve.
Hey guys.
And our special guest, we have Sebastian Wolff, the founder of Materia Collective.
Hello.
And we have Eric Buchholz, the arranger and project director for their newest release, Hero of Time. This portion, what we like to do is we like to just take a look at the industry as a whole and Nintendo's place in it. And in this case, with you guys as our special guests, we want to look at video game music in the industry and how it helps affect just the direction everything's going. So, out of curiosity, where do you see video game music? Where has it come over the past, let's say, 5 years, and where do you see it going?
Living in Seattle, Seattle has become a little bit of a mecca for video game music, given how much of the industry is up here. We have a lot of the AAA studios. We have Nintendo and Microsoft. We have Facebook with now Oculus. We have Vive. We have Steam. We have a lot of the industry sort of focusing on the Pacific Northwest. It's really exciting to see. Now, in terms of music, having been to Game Developers Conference and Game SoundCon, the future is VR, as they say. So, it's really exciting to see sort of where that is going. Especially on the implementation side of things. I recently attended a talk specifically about music and as it's being used in interactive media, especially for VR. And one of the interesting things that they mentioned was if you're building immersive worlds and immersive experiences, having music that sort of tries to accompany you and drown out, this is the level and here's the music that plays with the level, that's sort of disappearing a little bit. And it's more about having the contextualization of the music as its role for location in the game or specific motifs or characters. And specifically with respect to Nintendo, Breath of the Wild, the music feels very much in-game, right? You don't really have... Well, here's the drumming beat for Gerudo Valley. Mm-hmm. Here are themes and motifs that place it within the world. Or, if you approach a stable, you have that fade in. Here's that flute motif, and you have a little bit of percussion, mm-hmm. and you have, everything feels very intentional. So, from a future of the video game music perspective, I think the last 5 to 10 years have sort of led up to a much higher focus on context and on the implementation side, rather than we have 5 levels and 3 bosses and we need music for these. And it's more of a very, very intentional construction of music and its very deliberate placement in the world of the game. That was sort of a roundabout way of phrasing it. Music is very important. It should be praised.
You stole everything I was going to say.
Oh, that's a cheap answer. He's just what he said.
No, I was gonna talk about Breath of the Wild, and he summed it up very nicely.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I've noticed a few years back when I first went to Video Games Live, and I'd really taken video game music for granted, I think, for the longest time. And then all of a sudden, when I heard it played live and I saw the screen at the same time, and all of a sudden these floods of emotion just came back, and I felt the same way I felt when I played that game. And all of a sudden, I realized how important music was to video games. And I feel like there's a bunch of developers that are all of a sudden realizing how important it is as well. And now you're starting to see that full integration, that it's not just something like you said, that do you know this song because it's the specific level in a game. It's now the feeling that you get when you reach this aspect of the game, and then it's just woven in there as another character almost.
Well, I'll just elaborate a little more on what Sebastian was saying. With terms to the future of VR, and as we head into that future of even just immersive overworld, open air video games like Zelda, I think we are going to see a lot more of this immersive quality of music, where rather than having a seamless, endless loop of music, it's going to be more how to describe it? It's going to mean more because it's not everywhere, right? And so there's going to be specific points where the music itself comes from the world rather than just from nowhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, the whole time you were talking, Sebastian, the word that came to mind was organic. Like the whole world feels like the music incorporated is very organic. Now with the one thing you mentioned about how like we have certain little levels and then music to it, and it feels less like that. There's also something to be said about those older school, and the main franchise to me that comes to mind is Mega Man, where each game is broken up into levels and each soundtrack is distinctive, and to this day you can hear one and immediately go, that's Snake Man, oh that's Quick Man, oh that's Dr. Wily. And I think I've seen like those type of tracks even put in organically and still drum up that same type of emotion. So do you see that style completely going away, or do you see maybe some of that still sticking around?
No, I don't think anything's going to go away, because there's always going to be a demand for the 2D platformer titles that will want to use that sort of music as opposed to some sort of open air type music implementation that we just described. And I don't think there's really going to be much that gets pushed out by this new emerging sort of style of game and style of music implementation. But I think it'll be interesting for sure.
It widens it widens the landscape in terms of what is possible, right?
Now, see,
broad sweeping statement, but in terms of when you have large open world games, you have to approach them very differently, and large open world games wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, totally different. Now, one thing you mentioned, Sebastian, was VR, and I like VR when it doesn't make me sick. But one thing I do notice, like I went out and I got the 3D headphones and all that for the 3D sound, just for that experience. And one thing I did notice with VR using really well was sound effects. Sound effects were totally used for that immersive. I felt a little bit more than music. You might feel differently, but I'm curious, where do you see music in the VR scene? Like, how do you see VR music working with those 3D sound effects? So, like, if you're walking in a jungle, you not only feel and hear like you're in the jungle with the birds and the insects and maybe a tiger running across you, whatever, but you also have that sound, whether it be ambient or an orchestral, grand piece, playing. How do you feel that will work?
I mean, with VR, I'm less integrated than I was maybe 6 months ago, but the latest sort of guideline for VR and AR is that music without context doesn't work. Like, it's straight out flat, doesn't work. So that's why sound design and sound effects and that sort of side of the game audio world has become a little bit more important for VR titles. Because if you're hearing like a little ditty in the back of your mind, you're going to wonder, like, especially like, where is it coming from? And just having it just blast in stereo doesn't make sense either. Like, VR and AR is all about immersiveness and sort of like integrating you into that world that they want you to experience. And things like stereo sound in a 3D world will feel like two-dimensional people in a 3D landscape. So I think if audio, like soundtracks or music, is to exist in a VR landscape, it will have to be very deliberate placements within context. Sort of, okay, if you're running in a village and you see a tiger, maybe in that case it might make sense to have like percussion and thumbs and brass and just like to give you some kind of sound, but used more in a sound design kind of way. Or then if you come across a village and you have a bard or something playing a little melody, then it makes sense. You have music, it's within context, right? So I think the future of music within VR and AR is going to rely very heavily on the immersiveness factor and whether that can be used in a more musical way rather than a sound design way.
It's going to require composers and sound designers to approach VR development from a totally different perspective almost, rather than as you would write for a film or a game where you only put music where it's appropriate. You also need to figure out where you can put music and how can you implement it so that it's interactive, and how is it going to feel appropriate in the game. Basically whatever Sebastian just said. So.
And you touched on the interactiveness factor of it. I was at a audio meetup last night, and they talked a little bit about interactive, not even just in AR and VR, but also sort of 3D environments. Basically, how can you make music more interactive? And when you're thinking about how you're composing, it's no longer you have through composed pieces and maybe they loop. It is much more of a, well, maybe you're composing vertically and horizontally, where you have different layers that you can turn on and turn off based on certain events in the game. And maybe you interact with the tiger and you have like 5 more stems that appear very naturally and they fade in within the soundtrack. So
that's so cool.
Interactivity, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that's so cool, like how it really is becoming just another aspect of the game, because you could have, for instance, going back to Breath of the Wild, there's so many different ways that you could play that game. Well, if you go like what you're talking about, having an interactive music and everything, there's maybe a different track that you're going to hear than your friend that's playing, because they went about this, accomplishing this area in a different way than you. And so they're hearing in this different music that fits the way they're playing, but it might be different than how you played it.
Exactly. Or even, going back again to Breath of the Wild, depending on whether you cook your recipe successfully, you're going to have a different soundtrack playing as you're cooking it.
It's really amazing how immersive game music in general has been incorporated, even when it's just background music. I was actually just talking with a friend of mine earlier today, because we knew we were going to be filming this and we were talking about video game music, and just examples like in Final Fantasy XIV, for example, there's a boss that you fight, the Cerberus, and there's battle music, and when you get swallowed by him, the music gets muffled, and it's like really cool, like, oh, you're hearing it from inside the stomach, and it just adds that level of immersion. They did it as well, Square, with World of Final Fantasy. There's times where you go underwater and the music gets very muffled when you go underwater, and I love to see that, and I think that's like that extra step that really brings these worlds to life, even though there's really nobody on the side like playing the music and you're like listening, except in Breath of the Wild there is Cass the accordion playing Rudo, or Rito, sorry, said that wrong. But the other thing, Steve, you mentioned Video Games Live when you went to it. When I went to it, and same with Distant Worlds and Ballad of the Goddess, or Symphony of the Goddess, the one thing I noticed was more mainstream. I noticed more people that weren't typical gamers. They were just like, either they were there taking their kids or their grandkids, but they were getting into it. They're like, oh, this is really great. Like, they have no idea. They still think video games are Pong and Tetris, and maybe they know who Mario is, but that's about as far as they go. And suddenly there's big orchestral tracks you're playing, and it's so interesting to see them light up, and it's almost like a whole new world opened. And I think that's where I'd like to see music going. And I know like Nintendo's been very stubborn. I think it was Mario Galaxy was the first one where they did Orchestrator. They tracked with their first one, and everyone like lost their mind. It was like, oh my god, Nintendo's using a real orchestra. It's no longer just chiptune. And since then they've obviously continued. And I think that makes such a good effect on games. Like there's like almost no negative to a live band playing. And that's why I want to see your music put in there. Like, I think we can really see some interesting aspects with merging the two styles with chiptune and with orchestra. And I'd like to see that.
Well, thank you. Genre subversion is actually one of my favorite things. You take an established genre and you tilt it the wrong way, and you drive it in a completely new creative direction. So, for example, I think it was one of the battle tracks in the Pokemon Symphonic Evolutions concert, where they worked with an established chiptune artist. I think it was Vert, who composed or orchestrated some of the like more chiptune heavy battle tracks in terms of like percussion. And he comes from a very established chiptune scene. He's one of huge inspiration. Like, he uses trackers in ways I didn't think were possible. So sort of having that integration between orchestra and chiptune is something I would love to explore a little bit more. That's a really fantastic idea. But touching on the point again about live video game music orchestra experiences, those are the sort of things that inspire the next generation. When back in middle and high school, I was playing Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts piano music on on piano, I was transcribing the songs myself because sheet music didn't exist. And now you imagine that. What if the industry of video games was at a place where this was really easy? You can make sheet music, you can make orchestra scores, you can send it out to high school bands and choirs and have them, be the next generation of video game musicians who are already interested, because they're already playing all of those games. I had a fantastic experience up here in Seattle. This was about 2 weeks ago. Because ArenaNet is up here, something happened with a local high school where they said, hey, we want to do a Guild Wars 2 concert. So I don't remember your high school experience, but I don't remember a 79-member high school orchestra playing at a session musician level and playing Guild Wars music. So they put on a 90-minute concert with Guild Wars 2 music, and this was a high school. So when you imagine sort of the effect that video game music can have on the inspiration of musicians who are already involved in video games, how can you further that relationship? That's something I would love to explore more, and basically inspire the next generation and give them the resources to really take charge and ownership of the music that they would love to play.
Yeah. I was going to ask, actually, you kind of already answered it a little bit, but what have you seen in advancements of video game music and stuff? Because I feel like in my little experience, things like the live orchestras and stuff like that has probably inspired other people to, look into it, to listen to it a lot more, to value it a lot more. I know it's done that for me, and I never really expected myself to go to an orchestra. this is not my thing. And all of a sudden I found myself going to a video game orchestra because it was video game music. This is awesome. Exactly. And it all of a sudden opened my mind up to the orchestra style of music. And because it melded those two things together in a way that I never thought about before. And so I imagine it's probably having a huge impact on the industry as more and more gets popular and everything like that. Other than, the high school, that's an awesome experience. Have you seen any other advancements with, the next generation getting into video game music and stuff like that a lot more? People buying your albums a lot more, I guess, or anything?
So I've got a story that's just kind of came up recently. My aunt lives down in California. She's an optometrist, and she had a patient come in, and he was like a 12 or 13, like 8th grader. I don't know how old they are, but she asked him about like the new Zelda game or something for whatever reason, and then she knew that the kid was like a musician and stuff, so she said, oh, my nephew did this Zelda album with an orchestra, and then the kid already knew about it. Like he knew my name, and like my aunt was like, whoa. Like so that was pretty funny to hear from her. As far as like, I didn't think younger kids would really be too interested in it, because it's Ocarina of Time. This game came out almost 20 years ago, but there it is.
That's really cool. Old 20 years, jeez.
I don't want to think about that. Pokemon
right
this year. No, but that's the sort of experiences I would love to have more of. In terms of advancements, I come from the music licensing and music business world a little bit, and the music industry moves rather slowly. Now, the video game world is focused on making video games. So you don't really have a lot of emphasis from composers, the studios, the developers, or the music or the game publishers on music. I mean, music traditionally is already an afterthought, where it's sort of, oh, we're releasing this game in 2 months. I guess we should start thinking about music. That's sort of how the process goes in many indie studios, especially. But so given that is sort of the established landscape, very few people think about what is possible with music. And that's actually one of the goals for Materia Collective, to empower the composers who've already created something. Usually it's like, okay, I composed for this game, it gets implemented, and then the game ships, and that is the end of the life cycle. And for me, that's the beginning, right? Because you have music that is created that people will love, that they will fall in love with. What if you make sheet music? What if you make it really easy to license cover songs? What if you make orchestral scores so they can play it in high school or in middle school, or, sheet music for piano and instrument in C. So, you can have solo violin or flute or someone play along with it, rather than rather than, scouring the internet for like, hey, I'm trying to find this arrangement, and maybe you find something, maybe you don't, but sort of having the resources for the next generation to be really interested in it. For example, Materia Collective published the Undertale soundtrack. So one of the things that we were able to do with that is put out official sheet music. So we published the official Undertale piano collection sheet music. We put out an album. We worked together with an incredible arranger, David Peacock, and an incredible pianist, Agustin Mayo Gonzalez. And those are the kind of projects I would love to have happen more, where here's a really cool thing that is now possible. Do it, right?
That's really cool. Yeah, because once you give them those resources, man, that could truly inspire the next person that's gonna come out and develop just maybe even a better soundtrack than Undertale. Because now they have the resources and you know what, I can do this. I can actually do this, and who knows what we'll see from that kid in 5 years.
Exactly. And this has already happened in the last 5 years, where I gotten to know other video game composers and hey, I'm really trying to break into the industry. What do I do? And then I run into them at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, and maybe we remember each other, and then he tells me hey, this is what I've been working on. It's wow, I've heard of these games. That's super cool. So seeing that progression happen for composers is really cool.
I think that's fantastic. I mean, I'm still going off on the high school thing. I mean, I played the violin, and I was happy that we got Ode to Joy to play. I mean, I would have loved some video game music at the time. Playing Zelda's main theme would have blown my mind as a kid. But I think that's really, really smart. And I would think that any high school orchestra, if they got the opportunity to make a soundtrack for an upcoming game, the kids would have gone crazy. We want to play this, and you're going to be recording. And I know there's all these arguments about money for the schools and the arts. Do we need the arts programs? And music is one of those on the chopping block. And I think this would help really turn that around, because the game industry is so big, and there's a lot of kids, third grade, fourth grade, they may be interested, then maybe they fall out of it. But hey, you want to play a song that's going to be on the next, Call of Duty, or on the next Mario, or on the next Halo, and oh my God, really? I could be there? I'll be in the credits? That would just drive such an interest. And past high school, that may interest them to continue. And like you say, who knows what they're going to compose? They can compose even better stuff.
Yeah,
I think it's exciting just thinking about that prospect.
There's a lot of really cool opportunities for the next generation, and I would love to help make it happen, whatever it entails.
Here you go, school systems that are watching this, contact Sebastian. You will make it happen. All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up here. Any final thoughts? We're going to start with you, Eric. Any final thoughts on just music in the industry and where it's going and where you'd like it to go?
I think it's going in a pretty good direction right now. There's still a lot of work to be done, kind of as far as copyright and that sort of all the legal stuff. But I think as a whole, we're getting there.
I agree with that. What about you, Sebastian?
I would love to see more diversity. Honestly, it's a couple of my local composer friends. There's a Women in Games group, and it's really fantastic to see what they're doing. And I would love for there to be more recognition about this is possible now. Inspire the next generation, but also maybe inspire girl gamers or trans gamers or whoever. People who might feel otherwise secluded from the industry, provide them with, a bit more empowerment to achieve their goals as well. I would love to see more of that.
Cool.
Amen there. I agree. What about you, Steve? Any final thoughts on this?
Oh, I just want to thank you guys. I think what you're doing and creating these albums and stuff like that, it is furthering, the advancement of music. It's helping people like me, a few years back who didn't really appreciate video game music. And because of what you guys are doing and others that are doing similar things, you're helping me appreciate that music so much more. And it makes me appreciate the original composers and appreciate the games as well. And so I think, to keep up what you're doing, and I praise you guys for trying to inspire the next generation too, because I'm going to be playing those games. And I want some great music that's going to be even better than what I'm hearing now. And I can't wait until it actually happens.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree with you, Steve, 100%. What you guys are doing is fantastic. I really can't wait just to see what the future holds. I think the music is definitely going in the right direction, and I think that, with each generation, even breaking it down to each year, music becomes more and more important part to each game released. Not just for the big established franchises, but like the little guys, like you mentioned, Undertale, where it really has an effect. And I'd love to see you guys be a part of that and inspire more and future generations to be a part of that. And like I said, the girl gamers, we gaming is about love. Gaming is about embracing and about just everybody inclusion and everybody having fun. And I think that's very important. All right. I do also want to thank Sebastian and Eric for joining us on this episode of Industry Talk. So thank you guys very much for coming. Like I said earlier, their newest release, Hero of Time, which is an arrangement of songs from Ocarina of Time, can be purchased right now digitally at materiacollective.com. And there's also a physical disc. There's two different versions, a limited and a regular. They will be shipping April 24th, so you can pre-purchase them now, support physical media, and give them some love. And Steve, thank you for joining us on this episode.
No problem.
I'm Barry, and thank you guys. And remember to go to NintendoFuse.com for all your Nintendo needs. Thank you guys, and have a great evening.